Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton. And this week, we're going to get into a marital case study. So this case study is completely fictional. And so if it correlates with anything in anybody's lives, that's a complete coincidence because this is 100% fabricated.
Okay.
So I'm going to read through this case study and
You
then...
are not really Nicole.
No,
Okay.
I'm not Nicole, nor do I know a Nicole and Philip.
And Curtis is not Philip. Okay.
No, this is not at all me and Curtis in disguise. Right. So I would never air my marital problems in a public platform like this.
No, not a wise thing to do.
No, that's not. Okay, so I'm going to read this case study and then Mark and I are going to diagnose it. So we're going to give a game plan for how you would treat this couple, what you would do, what advice you would give them.
You've had your marriage therapy class, so I expect a lot of great input from you.
Uh-oh. The pressure's on.
Yep. You've got pressure.
Yeah. And in this case study, I was really looking for something that was general enough that it could apply to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And so,
which I think is true. A lot of these issues, in fact, the three issues would apply to many, many, many couples. So
yes. Yeah. All right. So I thought it would be an interesting perspective for our listeners of here's how therapy works. This is kind of what you do when you go to marriage counseling. All right. So here is this case study. Nicole and Philip have been married for 10 years now, and the relationship doesn't seem to be what it used to in the beginning. They both acknowledge that their marriage is struggling, but can't seem to find a way to get back to the happy couple they used to be in the early part of their marriage. 3 years into their marriage, their oldest was born, and 2 years later, a second followed. They both have families that live in the same state, but Philip's family lives close enough that they get together several times a month and frequently have his family watch the kids while they are busy with work engagements or community involvement. It is a several-hour drive to visit Nicole's family, and she feels that they don't visit them often enough. She is very close with her family of origin and talks to a member of them almost every day. When they do go visit, Philip often feels excluded or that he doesn't quite fit in right. He struggles to interact with them and usually feels like an outsider. He dreads their visits and finds excuses to avoid going. Philip and Nicole rarely make time together, just the two of them. When they do have extended periods of time, just the two of them, they quickly run out of things to talk about and end up just being silent. As a result, what few dates they do go on consist of movies or activities that are too engaging for in-depth conversation. One of their biggest struggles is their sexual relationship. They both felt like it was satisfying and good in the beginning, but since having kids, their priorities have shifted and they can't seem to rekindle the old flame. Philip feels like Nicole is never interested in sex, and when she does oblige, he feels like she's only doing it out of obligation. He has long since given up hope that she will initiate sex. Nicole feels that Philip never does anything to make her feel special and only wants sex to satisfy himself. She complains openly to her sisters that he's terrible at being romantic and only does something nice for her when he wants something. Both Nicole and Philip want to save the relationship, but are thinking mainly of the kids in their desire to maintain the marriage. Every time they try and discuss their relationship, it ends up turning into a huge fight. Neither wants to deal with step-parents. They think maybe they can find a way to stay married as good friends who parent together. This seems like an easier option than fighting about their relationship all the time and never being able to fix things. Initial thought.
If a couple like this came into my office, one of the first things that you do, there are a lot of things that go on in that first session. One, the primary goal is to give them hope. Now, I make the assumption, but I also ask them what their goals are. Mm-hmm. But if they're going to spend the time and the money to come in and be in my office, then the assumption, I think the goal is to try and save the relationship and make it better. And so in that first session, you can't do a complete assessment. I think a
Hmm.
complete assessment of the marriage maybe takes 3, 4, 5 sessions. It
Okay.
certainly isn't going to happen in the first session. And so what you can do is hear their story, give them a forum in which to talk. And I think as the marital therapist, what you're trying to do in that first session is let them know that you're going to be in the middle,
Hmm.
right? That you try and see both sides and try and validate both of the couple's experience
Hmm.
in what they're telling you, because it's really important that they feel heard and that they think they know that you get them and that you're willing to, go down the middle with them,
Hmm.
not take sides. That's really important. And then at the end, which we can go over after we've talked about some of these issues, is to give hope. And how would I give hope about
Right.
these things? That's what they're lacking. I mean, even in your narrative here, it's almost that last paragraph. If they came in and told me that, I'd acknowledge that it seems like they've given up hope
Right.
in trying to get back together, and they're just going to try and make it work as good friends and parent together. I've never seen that be successful.
I did want to hit on that is, this idea of a couple that can live together and be asexual. And that is definitely, I feel like, an issue in society. Is, I mean, sex is a big deal. And there's a lot of issues surrounding sex. And I know it's very, very common in Christian cultures where sex isn't talked about often enough. And we've talked about this in detail in past episodes, but couples have to find a way to have good dialogue about sex and about their sexual relationship.
Right. And the unspoken assumption is when you get married, you're going to have sex with each other.
Yeah.
For most marriages, there's the expectation of monogamy and
Hmm.
fidelity.
Hmm.
And so you can't say, okay, I promise to not have sex with anyone else. And then 2 years into the marriage, all of a sudden one of you says, well, I'm not going to have sex anymore. But it doesn't seem like that's the issue. It seems like they just gave up trying.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's another common thing, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, is this difference in desire.
Right.
And this is probably very common, that Philip wants her to initiate. Philip wants her to be interested, and
Hmm.
she's just not interested. She'll do it because she feels like she's obligated to, but she's not, she's doing it just to oblige him.
I think in that episode that you're
Hmm.
referencing, I have a hard time remembering what happened yesterday, so I'm not going to a great memory on our past episodes, but I talked about the idea of the gas pedal and brakes
Yep.
that we all have around, and probably about a lot of things in life, but around sexuality. And so you can say, well, she's not interested.
Hmm.
But what I would want to know, and this is certainly not something I would do in the first session because
Okay.
this is later on. I think to get in depth with sexuality, you need to form a relationship first.
Sure.
But later on, what I'd want to know is, okay, what is it that needs to happen in order to make her be interested or help her be interested? Because at one time she was.
Hmm.
Now it changes when you have kids, and I know we've
Yeah.
talked about that in past episodes, and part of it is certainly, the obligation of taking care of the children, which is what I think parents ought to do. If
Right.
you're choosing to have children, then you focus on the kids. But at some point, especially like after 1 year, 2 years, 2 years, as the kids get older, then I think you can start looking at how to focus again on each other. And so there are three things, there may be more in this narrative, but three things that stood out to me, pretty common issues. The first is the in-law issues that we can talk
Hmm.
about. The other is very little time together. And the relationship, at least doesn't, from the narrative, clearly seems like it's not a priority for either one of them.
Hmm.
And then the
Yeah.
third one is the sexuality, low desire from Nicole, lack of romance from Philip. And often what I try and do so I'll ask the couple, what brings you in? What are the issues you want to work on?
Hmm.
What are your goals? And then I'd want to be able to, I try and simplify things
Hmm.
and not make it complex because I think that the simpler it is, the easier it's going to be for them to grasp on to some of the things I'm going to ask them to try. And so I try and make it very simple. I mean, if you think about sexuality, we've had a couple of podcasts on sexuality, and in reality, it's kind of complex,
It
right?
is. Yeah.
But if we just focus on the two things, so I just put low desire for Nicole,
Hmm.
lack of romance from Philip, those you can really focus on.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you started going into the whole physiology and what's going on in the brain and all that, then it gets to be overwhelming and complex. But if
Yeah.
you say, okay, if what would help her desire or what would help her to be more interested is more romance from
Yep.
Philip, whatever that means. And so again, the detail is, what does romance mean for Nicole? What
Yes.
does romance mean for Philip? See, these are solvable problems. So we go back to establishing hope for the couple. I'd want to let them know I think all three of those are solvable issues. But I
Mm-hmm.
tend to be an optimist, and it doesn't mean it's easy. I
Right.
never say to a couple, oh, this is going to be easy.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say these are solvable issues if you want to work on it. But, going back to that last paragraph where it's easier to just get along and be good friends, not fight about the relationship, that's just not going to work long term. And I think that from my experience, they'll end up in a divorce.
And I think that is where therapy can be so helpful
Right.
because I know a lot of people have a lot of hangups about therapy and they think, I don't want to go to a shrink and talk about my feelings. Well, that's not necessarily what therapy is. Sometimes therapy is just having a good mediator. So your role, Mark, is to listen and to validate and empathize both sides. And so they can have this hard conversation. So, maybe every time they try to talk about how can we get back to where we were in the beginning? And it dissolves into this fight. Well, you're this unbiased third person that can say, okay, let's pause here. Because you can see the warning signs of, okay, they're getting flooded. These guys are clearly getting heated. Let's put the brakes on and let's dive into this and let's stop and kind
And
of and figure out what's really going on here and get to the root of this matter. That's what can be so beneficial about marriage counseling is you have somebody who can be a brake pedal in these tense conversations or these hard conversations.
yeah, it's a brake pedal, but I think it's also teaching new skills. I think it's
Yes.
all, for me, marriage, working with couples is more about skill acquisition than anything. Now, it's true
Yeah.
we go into emotions, but that's only if they bring that up and saying, I want more of an emotional connection, which happens most of the time, really. And so, trying to help them figure out how to get that emotional connection, for me, that's just skill acquisition again.
Mm-hmm.
Being more romantic, that's just a skill. It takes focus. And so I let them know that what we're going to be working on is skill. And that seems to be less threatening than saying, we're going to rip open your psyche and let you be vulnerable in front of everyone here. That's not going to feel good to people. It might
Yeah.
happen, but that's not the goal. And so, I mean, if you think about, say, the in-law issues,
Mm-hmm.
over the course of several sessions, you're going to try and pull out what's really going on there.
Yeah.
Because I think the thing that stands out is Philip feels excluded. And
Uh-huh.
so you have to dig into what is it that's actually happening. And in this case, it could go back to his own family of origin issues. It could be the way her family is treating him. There are any number of reasons why this could happen. It could be that he's more of an introvert or do you remember, again, we've done several episodes where we talk about the two mini cultures coming
Yep.
together and forming their own culture in the marriage. And maybe Philip is uncomfortable in her little mini culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more you talk about it and you put it out there about what it is that makes you uncomfortable in this context, that's the place where I'd help the couple have a different conversation so that she understands his emotional response. So
Mm-hmm.
feeling uncomfortable is an emotional response.
Yeah.
And so even though he's not saying, here's my emotion, it's an emotional reaction. And so she's got to understand that. But he's also got to understand her emotional response that she feels like she doesn't see her family
Right.
very often. The way the narrative is, it could be that Philip resists because he's uncomfortable. And so that, he puts on the brakes for visits when if he felt comfortable and accepted, then maybe that would change. Again, solvable problems, but you have to get to what's underlying the issues. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's something that her family is doing, which
And
sometimes happens. And so you
right.
have to deal with that because you can't control other people, but you can talk about how do you move forward in that
And
conflict.
that's what can make in-laws so complex or relate issues with in-laws is
Hmm.
because you can't control them. When you go to therapy and you say, we're having issues with our in-laws, the only thing you can work on is yourself. And so I think one of the things that's going to be really helpful for both Philip and Nicole is for one, for Nicole to understand and to acknowledge Philip's struggle. Because if Philip can
Yes.
feel, if he can feel validated and if he can
Yep.
understand, you know, it's hard for me to go visit your family and here's why, she could either do something to alleviate that or, maybe they just set that boundary of, okay, we're going to plan X amount of visits and, we'll only stay for this amount of long. So you just have to hang on for X amount of time and X number of times per year or holidays or, whatever that's going to look like for them. I think that would really help because when it comes to in-law issues, again, it can be complicated because, hopefully if it is something that the family is doing, Nicole can advocate and say, hey, I need you guys to not do this, right? Or if
Right.
it's just, I mean, sometimes families, I don't know, maybe they have some weird family quirk and he's like, what is going on in this family? And there's nothing he can do to change it. So he just needs to find a way to accept that. So, I mean, in law issues can be really complex, and there's just really, when it comes down to it, there's a variety, any number of possible solutions. You just have to find what's going to work for
Right.
the individual couple.
Right. And so the first step is to, as a therapist, if they're in your
Hmm.
office, is to help them have a more productive dialogue
Yeah.
and a more emotionally focused dialogue, at least at the start, because that's how you get to the validation and the
Yeah.
empathy. And once you have the validation and the empathy, then you can go to solution. Okay, what are we going to do about this? And it's really important that you help them be a team on
Hmm.
this. This is a couple problem, so they've got to approach it together.
And another thing to consider is, does Philip acknowledge the way Nicole feels about not getting to see her family often enough?
Right.
Has she acknowledged that to him? Or,
Hmm.
or is this just a bitter and resentful feeling that she's holding in and that just kind of explodes in some subconscious level in a different way? And so I think that's another issue that a lot of couples run into. And I think this also goes back to the she wants more romance
Hmm.
is, I mean, it sounds like in the beginning things were really good, probably because either the passion was just running high or, I maybe it's just the joy of the new relationship. And so you maybe don't need as much to feel special because it already feels special. Like this person has picked me, they're dedicated to me, we're in our happy own little life. But as time goes on and your priorities change, especially with your kids, you want to feel special again. You want to feel like you're still a priority in your life. But I think it can be hard to acknowledge that. Here I am going to go making a generalization, but the thing about generalizations, as we often say, is they're true. And that's that women often don't say what they want, they don't say their expectation. They just expect men to know.
Yeah.
And so I could definitely see this being the situation or the case that Nicole wants more romance from Philip. Philip is completely oblivious. He has no
Right.
idea of this
Right.
expectation that she set. And so he doesn't know how to do it, or he doesn't even know that he should be doing it. And that's another issue you have to address.
And fundamentally, they don't have good dialogue at all. I
Yeah.
mean, they can't. They don't do a good job of listening to each other, and they don't have the validation and the empathy. And so, at the start, if you want to address these problems, you can address them in session
Hmm.
as you're teaching them how to have the different conversation. I think that's really how it works best. So you're teaching them these skills, but you're saying, okay, let's take your current issues,
Yeah.
which could be in-laws, it could be, no connection, sexuality. Let's deal with those as you learn how to have, better skills around your dialogue. So that's kind of the overlay is you're teaching them how to do this by using the current issues. Also, I don't know if I've ever let a couple get into a fight in my office. It's
Okay.
really not productive.
Okay.
The reason it's not, they don't need to pay me to come in, they can fight at home. They do
Sure.
that
Sure.
well. And the goal is to teach them a way to talk about the same issues in such a way that they don't have the fight because you can't.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, um, they aren't listening well to each other. They don't have the validation. They don't have the empathy, and they're probably trying to talk over each other. They're
Mm-hmm.
trying to tell each other how they're wrong. I mean, that these are the things that I see, most every day. And so it's really about skill acquisition. But
Right.
so the in-law issues, that's how I handle that. I just want to have more information on what is it that's going on that makes him feel excluded. I
Mm-hmm.
think the time, very little time together.
Yes.
There used to be, what was the saying? It was quality time over quantity time, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And like if you had quality time, that's good enough. I've never bought into that. I think you need both. I
Yeah.
think that you need quantity time because the only way you're going to get quality time is if you create the opportunity for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And and so one of the things that I try and help couples understand is that they need to develop a curiosity about each other
Yeah.
and each other's worlds. And it's probably not surprising how often, sometimes it's surprising to me how often I hear one or the other say, well, I'm not really interested in what they're doing. That is a gigantic red flag for me
I
because if
think
you aren't interested in the other person's life, you're never going to be connected.
and think about how hurtful that would be.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
like if Curtis ever said, I'm just not that interested in your life, I
Yeah.
mean,
Or like if you want to talk about school, right? And he
uh-huh.
says, hey, I really don't want to hear about that, Liz. See, that would be hurtful,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But couples do that.
Yeah.
I
They
hear them
and
do it in my office. So.
well, and that was a skill that Curtis and I learned to acquire
Mhm.
was taking an interest
Yeah.
in each other's lives because I mean, we definitely would do the things. I had to learn to be interested in video games for Curtis.
Hmm.
And I know I did it in the beginning is he would start talking about this game and I would just kind of try to I would hurry through the conversation just to get through it. Well, it's really easy to pick up on that. And so, I had to learn to show an interest because I'm interested in him and
Yeah.
because I love him. So one of the things that he's done that I've appreciated is or Curtis, I've recently got really into the Tour de France this year.
Oh, watching it, is it on now?
Oh, well, okay. So the men's Tour de France wrapped up. And
Okay.
now the Tour de France Femmes, it's the
Yeah,
female Tour
man.
de France. Yeah. And so, Curtis is taking a little bit of an interest in this for me
Hmm.
because I've been watching it religiously,
Wasn't it a four or
devoutly.
5 hour bike ride like every day for a
Yeah.
long, like for 3 weeks or 2 weeks or
Yeah.
something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. And for the girls it's only a week, but still.
Okay.
Anyways, and so, Curtis has noticed this and he's taken a little bit of an interest. And it helps that it's a sport and he's really into sports. But, cycling isn't it's not really his thing, but he's asked questions about it. Oh, so what happened today or who won today? Who won the
Hmm.
stage? And I appreciate that and that means a lot to me. And I in turn try to ask him questions about work. And oftentimes I have no idea what he does at work and what's going on. I mean,
Uh-huh.
like but I work really hard to pretend to know. And the point is I'm showing an interest, and he knows that a lot of what he does goes over my head. But that's not what counts. What counts is that I'm trying. I'm interested in him. And going back to Nicole and Philip, one of the things that I thought was interesting was that they plan dates that don't require them to talk
Yeah.
because they run out of things to talk about and there's this awkward silence. And so one of the things that I think couples neglect as time goes on is they neglect their friendship. They forget how
Hmm.
to be just friends. And it goes back to what you said about, this curiosity about each other. And when you're first getting to know somebody, you're trying to learn as much as you can about them, right? You want to know everything about them. And so there's always questions to ask and always things to talk about. But then as things go on and you get married and you've been married for so long, you feel like you know everything about your partner's world that you lose that curiosity and you forget how to be just friends or how to talk to each other about just anything. And so, I think friendship is something that needs to be cultivated in a marriage, right?
Hmm.
It's an important part that couples talk about. I mean, I love it when Curtis and I talk as just friends, right?
Yeah.
I love when we just have dialogue that's about nothing in particular. We're just talking, we're just being friends.
Well, Gottman says that friendship is the basis of intimacy,
Hmm.
which I believe. And so
Yeah.
you have to be friends first before you can get through. that emotional intimacy. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right as far as focusing on friendship, but the friendship, I don't think you ever really know completely, your partner. I mean, I think it's a
Hmm.
lifelong journey. I mean,
Yeah.
there are things about Lindy's childhood. We've been married 46 years. There are things about Lindy's childhood that come up, and I think I've never heard that before,
Hmm.
46 years on. And so it's just we are so complex as human beings. Our internal world is complex, and you have to be curious about it. And it just says a lot about your interest in the other person. I'll go out and make a generalization. Again, I think men have a harder time with this.
Hmm.
At least the men I see have a little bit harder time being interested in their spouse's world. But you can learn to do that because it's all about cultivating the relationship. And so if we go on to the sexuality, I'm guessing, what the narrative said is Philip only is nice to her or only tries to be romantic when he wants something. You put want something in quotes, which our
Uh-huh.
listeners I'm guessing that has to do maybe want something sexually, something like that. For him to understand that if he wants her to be interested in him sexually, he's got to be interested in her in other ways, not sexually. So
Right.
that's a mistake that I
Hmm.
think men make, thinking, oh, if I'm interested in her sexually, she'll be interested in me sexually. That's not how it works. So
Right.
if he's interested in her world, if he listens, and if he does things that are romantic, whatever that means to her, and so they've got to have a conversation that says, what's romantic to you, Nicole? And
Hmm.
then he's got to remember and start to figure out how to do that because I'm guessing he just, like a lot of men, he has no idea what that means.
Right. And it goes both ways. I'm sure Nicole has never told him. I mean,
Right.
Nicole's never really expressed this to her or what she wants. And, mature people say what they want. And so, you need to be
Right, but think of
direct.
this in the dynamic. If
Hmm.
so, two scenarios. She could go to him, like they're just sitting on the couch. She could go to him and say, Philip, I would like you to do this and this and this because that is more romantic to me. So that's one way.
Hmm.
He's probably not going to receive that very well. But if on his own he thinks, oh, I'd really like to do something romantic or nice for Nicole, he goes to her and says, hey, I really don't know what it is that you find romantic. Would you be willing to tell me about it? Can you see how those two are very, very different?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so having it originate from him is really big. It's
Hmm.
important for the relationship. And
Hmm.
so the men out there who are listening who might have this issue, it's up to you to be interested in finding out what it is that your partner finds romantic
Yeah.
and then start to do that. So, yes, you may not know what that means. You might be terrible at being romantic. I think it's just either a lack of knowledge or a lack of practice. That's all it
Hmm.
is.
Right. And for women out there listening who are thinking, I sure wish my partner would be more romantic. I mean, you need to have this dialogue. And when you do have this dialogue, you need to be careful that you don't come at this as an attack. Be like, I wish
Yeah.
you were more, you're not very romantic. I want you to be more romantic. You're gonna put his hackles up and be like, wait, where did this come from? Right. And so I would approach it from this perspective of I would like to have more romance in our relationship. Can we
Right.
come at it
And you
from
can
that
even say,
angle?
what does that mean to you, Philip? And then
Yeah.
hopefully he would reciprocate
Yeah. Yes.
if he's thinking, clearly and say, oh, what does that mean to you, Nicole? There are many soft ways to approach it. And one of the
Hmm.
soft ways is you could, for Nicole, she could have that dialogue. Boy, when we got together, it felt really good when you did this and this and this, and I really
Hmm.
missed that. And so that's a soft way just to say, I know you did this at one time, and essentially you're saying, I'd love it if you do it again.
Yeah.
But again, hopefully Philip takes the cue
Hmm.
and dives into it, thinking, oh, okay, she wants more romance. But in the end, it's okay to say, I really want more romance,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
it is. You should definitely be blunt. And like I said, mature people say what they want, but you just have to be careful about the way you do it because if you come at your partner and you attack them, they're going to get defensive and it just doesn't work well. So, one thing that I would do is I would give this couple an assignment or I
mhm,
guess an activity to
mhm,
work on together. And that would be some of Gottman's work in terms of increasing your love map or
Uh-huh.
enhancing your love map. And so
Right.
that comes directly from Gottman's book, Seven Principles for Making Marriage Work. And really what it is it's a way to have a good conversation, an in-depth, intimate, emotionally intimate conversation. And so that's one big, strong thing that I would recommend for Philip and Nicole is I would say plan a date that's not involved, go to a nice dinner or, just have a night in at home after the kids are in bed and just sit and here's a list of questions to go through and ask each other,
Yeah.
either from the book or from whatever, just so they can kind of get to know each other.
And another option, so we're going to focus on Gottman, but
Mm-hmm.
he's the marriage expert. I haven't looked into this, but I've got a couple client who is getting more into looking at him online. And what he's done is he's made some of his things like much more affordable. And so if you don't want to go, if you can't afford therapy, which is expensive and
Mm-hmm.
typically insurance isn't going to reimburse for it. But I think going online and looking at his site and looking at the different options that he has. And then I think he has a free, because I just listened to one today. You'd think I'd remember what he calls it, but there's this free, I think you can sign up like on an email list and he sends you these free 5-minute tips. And the one
Mm-hmm.
I listened to today was on stonewalling and then taking time outs.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a lot of couples, if they look at these things together, he's going to give you either free or lower cost than therapy. He's going to give you some ideas. And certainly the book, Seven Principles of Making Marriage Work, I think there's another one called 8 Conversations or 8 Dates.
I think it's 8 dates.
And
Yeah.
that's one that I think would be helpful for couples as well, because it's more what you're doing is you're giving structure. So it's not like you're saying, okay, what are we going to do to improve the relationship? He's going to take you through a more structured approach where it's not in therapy. And so I think his online stuff is a pretty good option.
It is. And so I myself downloaded Gottman's, he calls it his card decks. And
Oh,
that's
okay. Yeah, I got that. And that's free, I think, or it used to be when I got it.
it is.
It was free.
I downloaded it like recently, like I think
Yeah.
within the last 6 months or something like that. And it was free. And so, card decks, it's just a list of questions that you can ask.
What I like is they have all these different categories.
Mm-hmm.
And the date questions, again, are all the things that we've talked about. Like, here's the first question that pops up. If you could jump on a plane tomorrow, where would you go? See, that's being curious about your
Yep.
spouse, right? Because they might say something that like totally blows you away. Well, I had no idea that you wanted to go there. And it opens up this whole area for conversation, but only if you're curious
Mm-hmm.
about it.
Yeah.
And only if you really want to have that understanding and learning about your partner and the validation to
Mm-hmm.
at the end to be able to say, yeah, it makes sense that you'd want to go, wherever you want to go. I like those questions a lot. I think it's a good resource.
It's a way to connect it to have this emotional intimate connection, and
Yeah.
that's what these questions are going to do. They stimulate conversation, and if you can really take this exercise and kind of and dig deep, try to go in depth and really try to, like you said, be curious, you're going to get to know each other again on a different level,
Well,
and
that's
I
what this couple's missing is the connection.
they are, yeah. I mean, and it sounds like they're very busy and with 2 young kids, and it sounds like they're involved. They're both working and they're involved with their community. That makes for a really busy life. And
Right.
so,
And I hear this every day. And it
mhm,
is one of the biggest problem couples face is they're overscheduled.
yeah, yeah,
And so you can decide, do I want to cut something out? Because you're not going to get more than 24 hours in a
yep,
day. And so you've got to cut something out. You can cut something out and focus on your relationship where you can get divorced or have a
mhm.
miserable relationship. I mean,
Those are your options.
the choice seems pretty easy to me.
Yeah,
And I point out to couples, I have couples that say, we just can't find the time to talk. And I said, you do realize that you schedule an hour with me every single week and you come in and we focus on this.
yep,
You can do this at home and you don't have to pay me to do this. You can set aside an hour
yeah,
to
yeah,
actually sit down, or you can use it in addition to coming in to see me. It's often the way I put it. But it's just the choices around time are some of the more difficult choices we face, and
hmm
we can't do everything we want. The marriage, however, has to be a priority. That's the one thing that did stand out to me in the narrative, is it seemed like neither one of them are making the marriage a priority. And that's the first thing you need to. So in that first session, I try and give them the simple. So, I mean, it's not a simple solution, but I'd say you've got to make the marriage a priority. And if you don't want to do that, then don't waste your time and money.
Yep.
Because you've got to focus. It's focused on the marriage.
Yeah. Yep, it is. It's about boundaries.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is our next episode.
That's what we're going to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to get into a little bit more of a listener episode. So we're going to talk about somebody who is struggling a little bit with boundaries. And so I'm going to leave it there, because I think it's going to be a really interesting topic. And boundaries is something that everybody deals with. Everybody struggles with it, and everybody has to do it. So,
when I did the show with Frankie and Jess, they always kidded me about it. It was my favorite word.
Yeah.
Boundaries. I think it makes for very good relationships.
It really does. Yeah. Boundaries are important. Boundaries are the spice of life. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Yeah. Okay.
So they say variety is the spice of life. I think it's boundaries.
You say boundaries are.
Yeah. All right, everyone. We will see you all next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.